Hey guys!
Morning.
Welcome to the show. I don't know if it's just because Denny's not here, but I'm a little nervous today to show you some things. But I got my good friend Ryan over here, so he's going to be my eyes up in the sky.
Yep.
Oh, look, I got less bright. Thanks, Tony.
I'll be doing what Liz usually does.
Yeah.
Kind of playing host and engaging with you all.
Yeah, it's the easy part. I have the hard part today.
Shoes on the other foot now, Liz.
I know. Gosh, Denny. How do you do this every day? He's not watching. All right. Hopefully he's on the road.
Yeah.
He headed out west. That way. That's west. All right. Well, so today and on Friday, we are talking about knife sheaths. So I got pretty lucky last week. I reached out to my friend Kyle over at Kyle Royer Knives. And I was like, hey, Kyle, do you have a cool knife that you want a sheath for that I can use? Because my husband doesn't have a knife done, and we don't really have knives sitting around the house, except for kitchen ones. We have a lot of those. Oh, hey, we didn't turn on any of my lights. I mean, this is what happens when it is my job. That's what happens when I have to do this part. And so Kyle was like, yeah, I've got this knife. So he brought me the knife that he did for his Bowie class. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Kyle Royer, but he has a lot of YouTube tutorials out there. He also has like knife making courses that you can sign up for. You can become a member of the, I don't know what it's like, Royer Enterprises or International. I don't know. It's not international. Whatever he calls himself. Sorry, Kyle. I don't know what you call yourself if you're
Graphics Guild type thing.
Yeah. So he's got his own courses that you can buy into. There's like a monthly subscription. He releases different information about knife making every month. So in any case, little plug for Kyle and his family here. They do some really awesome work, and Kyle makes some of the most beautiful pieces, and he will teach you how to do the same. And so he brought me his beginner Bowie.
See it.
To make a sheath for, so I'm gonna put on my gloves here.
Guessing it's like high carbon, so you don't want to be the first one to touch it.
Exactly, it's pretty oiled up. Whenever you see it, it's gonna be a little linty because it's pretty oiled up, but that's all right. And we will kind of start. I already have my design ready to go. I have a bunch of parts cut, but we will talk about how I got to the place that I am at. So we're just going to kind of start at the beginning. So anybody look at his cool case, he got them all.
And if you look in the chat, Tony dropped in links to his website.
Perfect. So yeah.
Check those out.
How's that? It's going to be a little wobbly.
Wobble, wobble.
Oh, all right. So this is the Bowie.
It's beautiful.
It is gorgeous. It is a larger knife. I have designed for you guys this week an in-depth sheath is what I'm going to call it. I didn't do just an easy style. We did the video a couple years ago about making just like a flat sheath, also a fold-over sheath. Those are pretty straightforward. If you're a knife maker and you're making your own sheath, a lot of times you are doing just like kind of the straight fold over with a belt loop, or maybe the loop around the center to do the horizontal carry. If you're doing that, great. There's a lot of videos out there, but I'm going to do one that's a little bit more in depth. I'm going to do an inlay, and the version that I have designed for us this week has a frog style holder. So there is not a belt loop attached to the sheath itself. The frog slips up onto the sheath. It's caught by a button stud, and then the loop is attached to what is called the frog.
So I'd say this, with like the level of detail and inlay and stuff that you've got going, is kind of your standard sheet.
Yes.
At this point. Yeah.
This is something that I would make if
you've seen Liz's work and thought, man, how does she get there?
This is what we're going to do
today and Friday.
So this guy is a little over 10 inches long, or maybe right at 10 inches long for our blade here. And I wanted to do this Bowie style with a guard and kind of talk about fitting up to a guard and incorporating that into your sheath. Most of the time with a knife this size, I won't put a retention strap on it because I intend to make the sheath tight enough so that when the knife goes into it, I'm not worried about it coming back out. The only time that I might change my opinion on that is if I did some sort of like a scout carry where it sat at an angle, but this knife is pretty large. It might be awkward to sit it at an angle on your hip. So just kind of, there's a lot of things that you have to consider whenever you start making a sheath. And we did kind of, put out a video for some questions for you guys to submit the last few weeks. And one of them was, how do you know what type of sheath to make for the knife? And kind of like my biggest suggestion is, depending on if you're working with a knife maker or if you're working with the knife owner, so the buyer of said knife, usually the knife maker might have a generic standard that's like, this is going to be good for most people. If they don't have a buyer for the knife already, they're going to, have like, hey, this is a good generic for most people, will be satisfied with this style of sheath for whatever style of knife it is that you've been commissioned to make a sheath for. But if you're working with the owner of the knife, a lot of times they'll have some specs that they want, because either they're going to carry this, or if it's a piece like this is an art piece. Kyle, this is going to be his personal knife. He's like, I just want to be able to carry it at a knife show and just tote it around. So this isn't like going out in the backwoods. But if it were, then your customer might have some specs. So a couple of questions that I always ask. Do you want this horizontal or vertical? So that's just kind of the first one. Do you want a right hand carry or a left hand carry? Do you want to, if you're right-handed, are you wanting to pull it like this? If you want to carry it horizontally on your back, are you wanting to pull it out with a certain hand?
How wide's your belt?
Maybe how wide
Does this person wear a 2-inch belt daily?
Exactly. So those are a couple questions that you can ask your customers to kind of get an idea. But a lot of times that's about as far as I go with the questions, unless you have a super picky customer and then they have a lot of requests. Otherwise, it's just horizontal or vertical.
Yep.
And then how wide is your belt? And then what side do you prefer to carry on, so that you know which way to orient the sheath?
And this is like, I'll tell people when I'm talking about how I design leather patterns, is you need to ask those upfront questions to get your like details nailed down. But then the rest of it is on the crafter to know how to answer those next several questions that you're not actually going to get the chance to talk to your customer about.
Exactly.
You just got to develop that experience and understanding of that project, this audience. It's a lot.
Yeah. And then depending on the scale of knife that you're making your sheath for, a knife of this size, I really enjoy making a sheath for a knife this size because I have a lot of room to work. When you start getting into smaller sheaths, it starts to get tricky sometimes to put the detail that you might want to put, depending on how creative you're allowed to be or the price point. If you're making a $50 sheath, you're probably not going to get super creative with it. You're going to get something that's pretty standard, pretty straightforward to your customer, but if you're able to charge, a couple $100s for the sheath, then you might have the opportunity to really jazz it up and to use your creative juices to make it what you want. And another question was, how do you come up with your design for the sheath? I look at the knife, right? So I look at the details that the maker has put into the knife. So specifically, Kyle made this really beautiful guard here. It is absolutely gorgeous. So this detail is what I pulled from for a lot of the elements on my sheath. My belt loop, my belt loop end will be like that. The front of my frog will imitate this design right here, as well as the top of my inlay will also imitate that design. And so,
speaking of frog, a couple quick ones I've seen here in the chat. Dean, for what the knife is for, it's a display piece. This is an art knife. So made by the maker to show how knives can be.
Yeah, Kyle makes art knives. Yeah. So that's his thing.
You're not taking this out bushwhacking.
I mean, you could.
It's a show knife.
If you wanted to, but it is.
Yeah, it's sharp. It's a quality knife.
Oh yeah, no, this thing will cut you.
The other question I've seen is, what's a frog? And I have the same question.
So a frog. Hang on. Look, I can.
Oh no,
I've done one.
I will
it's hard to explain.
The camera's not doing this handle justice. The complexity of color and pattern on that material.
This is a dyed burl, I believe.
Yeah.
It's gotten a lot darker. If you look at his website, this is, like I said, you'll see the professional photo of this knife. The handle is a lot more vibrant blue. It's just kind of patina and aged, but the inlay that I'm using is this gorgeous blue snake. here that
Excellent.
really is highlighting a lot of the undertones. And Kyle was like, I'll probably sand this handle down and kind of revamp it a little bit.
Great dye job on that snake too. It really fades to the edges, which is perfect.
Gorgeous. So a frog is...
Is it that weird loopy belt loop thing you do? And that was the worst explanation. Sorry,
no,
folks.
the frog is it's the leather, it's a carrier for the sheath. So this. All right.
Oh.
So the sheath drops in, and then this is a separate piece. So it sits on a button stud.
So it's almost a holster for the sheath.
Correct. That is, yeah, it's a holster for the sheath. So think like a cup holder. I don't know.
So the frog goes on your belt, sheath goes into the frog.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Yep, and then it sits on a button stud of some sort.
And what that does from a design standpoint is this allows you to really get pretty buck wild with the sheath. With a art knife like this, you want an art sheath for it.
Yeah, it's just
so being able to have that sheath be just as much of a display piece.
Yeah. All right, so on to, I guess, design elements. So once again, I talked about taking this, just designing the sheath. I don't actually intend on, I'm just going to throw this out there as an FYI. I'm not going to be doing a lot of crafting. I'm going to be doing mostly talking today. Yeah, I have all my parts cut out, so I'm going to show you guys all the different elements and how everything goes together. And then Friday we'll come back and I will show you how I hand sew something that ends up being a decent thickness. I think another question that maybe Justin had on YouTube, or maybe Isaac also had it come through social media, is like, what is a welt and do you need one, and how thick of a welt? So I will also get to that part as we go.
Nice.
So once again, figure out what side the person is going to carry it on, and then that would be the way that you make the sheath. So if you know, if this one is going to be my top side would be opposite if it was carrying on the left versus on the right. All right. So Kyle's right-handed. We're doing a right side sheath. So what we do is I'm going to lay the knife out. Tony?
Too busy in chat?
So we lay the knife out. I like to use pencil, and then you trace around. I like to trace around the whole thing. That way I have kind of an idea of scale, especially when I'm designing how tall I want to make the belt loop. But, so we trace around the whole knife. And then I feel like somebody else also asked, like, how much allowance do you give yourself between the knife and the welt? And the answer is none. Yeah. You want the knife to fit in the sheath as, like, solidly as possible. So that means that your welt needs to fit like a pair of toe shoes around this knife. You don't want to give any wiggle. Like you don't want this to move in the welt at all. I'm sorry, that's hard to see when it comes to. Anyways, I traced the knife, right? Trace the knife. And then depending on the size, I like to use pencil or a pen, because you get a really thin line. Like the Sharpie would be nice for here, but it's going to give you a thicker line. And then you're like, what side of the line do I cut on? Also, I'm always afraid I'm going to mark up the knife if I have a Sharpie, and that scares the crap out of me. So, yeah, no, I'm not going to do anything.
Definitely not on the handle.
Yeah. So you trace your outline of the knife, and then you want to allow for your welt. So the reason that we have a welt is because knives are typically sharp. And if you don't have a sharp knife, I can't help you. The person that's making the knife, I guess, needs to work on their sharpening skills. I don't know, somebody was asked, like, why make a fancy sheath for a knife that's not sharp? I don't know. Ask your knife maker why they made a knife that's not sharp.
I'll say this knife is very sharp.
This knife is very sharp. It's very sharp. To become so I'm just going to go on a tangent here. Kyle is a master bladesmith, and in order to have that qualification so that he can put this MS stamp on his knives, he has to go through 2 phases of testing. The first is to get a JS or a junior smith stamp, and then the next one is to get the master smith test. And in order to do that, you also have to do not only like fit and finish of 5 knives, you also have to do cutting competitions. Well, it's like a cutting array, and then like it has to be a forged knife. Like you have to forge the blade. It has to be a forged blade, and then you have to do an array of different things to test the skill of the knife. And then when you're done with all that, you have to bend it at 90 degrees, and it can't break. So
Crazy.
that tests the it's like the quench that you did to make sure that like the spine is still flexible, but like the blade can still be sharp. So it's a whole thing. It's really fascinating to watch. It's super cool. And then at the end of all that, I think it still needs to shave hair or something ridiculous. So in any case, or maybe that's just the cutting competition. So knives.
Little fear, you're right on. She's wearing gloves to not get the oils from her hands on the knife primarily.
Yeah.
With this sort of commission work,
This is high carbon.
if this was a customer of Kyle getting this knife, and Kyle asked you to make the sheath for this knife,
I don't want to put any fingerprints.
you better
on
not
this.
be the one to do any patina on that knife. That
Yeah.
is the customer's privilege on a knife like this.
Yeah. So I couldn't find my cotton gloves, otherwise I might be wearing those. But these actually are a little bit more grippy, so it's kind of nice to make sure that you're holding on to everything. All right. So you trace the knife. Depending on the size of the knife is how much of a welt I will add. So for these larger blades, I like to add like a 3/8 welt. Sometimes I'll do a little bit wider, or depending on the section. So I did a dagger like last year, and the dagger was only 1 inch wide, but I wanted to have a lot of fun with that sheath. And so I mimicked the width of the guard in my sheath design. And so I went as wide as the guard at the top, and then I tapered it, and I actually had kind of like these 3 sections to do this really fun inlay design with the dagger. And so I like to play with the width of the guard. I like to be either really close or just inset from the total width of the guard. And so for this one, this is my final pattern. And so for me, I am coming just inside. You guys can kind of see that. And I think for this one, I kind of started out here, but then I didn't like it. After I got everything, my proportions didn't feel quite right. And so I brought that side in just a little bit because I had plenty of room to do so. And also, if you are doing that and you're kind of making the width a little extra wide for aesthetics, whenever you're sewing it, you can come up and do like a tack stitch at the top where you come up, go over 1 or 2 stitches, and then come back down and kind of tack that to make sure that you are keeping tension all the way across. Otherwise, if you have a lot of welt coming in and you have a really good fit, so the knife goes in nice and tight, you might start to get separation if your glue job isn't good enough between the layers of welt in the front and the back of the sheath. And so doing that little tack stitch to come over and back around, just a couple, will hold all those pieces nice together to make sure that you don't get that separation at the top. So I like to play with the guard width here, and that is sometimes like a 3/8 is probably minimum that I want on my welt for this kind of size of knife, but I might go wider than that depending on the aesthetic look that I'm going for.
The weight of the leather, William, is variety.
Yeah, I will get to there.
I split a bunch of stuff for her, and boy, every piece is a different weight.
Splitting everything. All right. So 3/8. Typically, it'll be a little bit wider up here than the 3/8. And then as you get more towards this section of the blade, it's a little bit more regular to that 3/8 inch wide width, just because I'm not trying to match anything up here. So this is my final design for the front of the sheath. And once again, I took a piece of paper, I trace it. I start drawing here. I'm going to put a line with a ruler, so I have a nice hard line right at the bottom of my guard. But then whenever I actually cut out my template, I added 1/8 of an inch to the top of my front and my back pieces, which which, I mean, it's the same, it's symmetrical, so is my front and my back. I added 1/8 of an inch to the top of everything. That way, once I get everything glued up, my sanding isn't taking away from the top of my sheath.
It's less scary.
Exactly. And I can go and get a really tight cut. So I will use a round knife when I'm done with this, and I will just cut straight through, and I'll cut that 1/8 inch off all the way across. That way I don't have to worry about my welt coming out either short or my front or my back coming out a little bit off. I have an allowance that I've accounted for up here to do a perfect trim, and I don't have to sand to make sure all my layers come out correctly. And so it's just a little bit of a guard, but you want to make sure that you do it consistently across all of your pieces. So if I'm going to, cut my back or my welt or whatever at this 1/8 of an inch, and I'm just going to just say this, whenever you're cutting out your pieces for a knife sheath, there's a lot of parts that you're stacking up and putting together, and the more accurate you can be with cutting your parts, sanding your parts, and the assembly of everything, the happier you're going to be with your edge geometry, and the smoother you can get your edge.
And that affects your stitching too in the end.
Exactly, it affects your stitching, and it affects the overall look. If you have an edge that is real wavy, if you've gotten your welt inset a little bit and then you have to sand off a ton of the top, and you're doing, like, a lot of times I will also do an inlay on the back of my sheath. Or if you're doing a border stamp on the back of the sheath, like, you need to make sure all of that is lining up so that whenever you do go to align and stitch everything, like, you're not offset on the front or the back, and that things aren't coming out strangely. So what I do is, after I get my design figured out and I'm happy with everything, before I start cutting any leather parts, my paper design goes on a piece of Bontex. Because paper moves. Like, paper is just scrunchy. You're going to get weird lines after you trace it 3 or 4 times. Like, it's just going to start to begin to misshape. And so everything goes on Bontex. I don't care if I'm only using this thing one time and this is the only knife I'm ever going to, make out of this pattern. It goes on Bontex before it gets cut out.
Well, and part of this style of project, in this, like, planning and preparation phase and just how you think about it, is be ready for it to not work the first time. Like, be ready to make this sheath 2 or 3 times till you get it exactly how you want it. Eventually you'll get to, it's not ideal, and eventually you'll get to a point where that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But if you're just getting started out in this style of, like, really high tight finish sheath,
it might take a few times.
Don't be afraid to start over.
A lot of times, so, like,
prepare for it.
If I'm tooling, I will tool my pattern a few times before I actually tool it on the sheath, or there was a sheath that I did, the one I did last year for Kyle. I had a really crazy belt loop design, and I kind of cut everything out of Bontex to, like, make sure that it went together before I cut it out of leather, just to, like, test my pattern pieces and make sure that I was happy, because I was doing, like, a weird belt loop construction that I'd never done before, and I was like, well, this is gonna be fun, we'll see if it works.
I make scaled down paper versions of all my purse designs before I ever grab leather.
Yeah. And so I added a top allowance, so I have a trim line here. I have gotten pretty darn good. It's hard because leather stretches so much, and especially with the welt, a lot of times if you're using split leathers, sometimes they can stretch as construction goes, as you just put it together. And so having this trim allowance and making sure everything's going to come up a little bit above, and then having that nice chop. Really, a cut line is better than a sanded line. And if you can cut and then sand at a really high grit, that's going to give you a better finish than starting at a low grit to, like, sand everything to a cut line, to trying to get that cut line. So also, if you want to, you can add that to your outside dimension. So if you're worried that you're not going to get, everything perfect, you should still add it and expect it. So if you want to trim your outside dimension instead of sanding it, add it. Add 3/8 of an inch to the outside. Enough to where you can hold it and cut it. Like a 1/4 inch would probably be fine. Add a 1/4 inch to the outside, but make sure you do it on every single piece and everything is consistent. And still, when you go to put it together, you want to be as accurate as possible, because when you go to trim, you want to make sure that you're lining up the top and the bottom, because sometimes these sheaths can get up to like 3/4 to 1 inch thick, depending on how many layers you have, how many elements you have, how thick the knife is. I know for that dagger sheath that I made last year, this section of the sheet, or of the knife as it came into the handle, was a 1/2 of an inch thick.
It's massive.
Here. And so I had to account for that in my welt. And then my front and my back was, almost a 1/4 inch thick on each piece, maybe slightly under. So I had like a whole inch of material in this section.
3-pound sheath.
It was an awesome sheath. It was really cool. But so it's really hard to line that up vertically if you're not being careful when you're cutting your parts.
Do you have time for a couple questions?
Yeah.
Got a few stacked up.
Okay.
So real quick, Bladesmith, thickness of Bontex, whatever floats your boat or whatever you have to.
Don't use anything super thin.
Yeah.
Don't use the paper thin one. Yeah, we used
the purple one.
Yeah.
It's the thickest one. I like it for patterns. Really durable. You can drop it and bend it and it'll be fine.
Yeah, next time you buy a side of leather, just throw in a piece of Bontex because it is so big. It's like $10 for a sheet that's like 3x4.
I've had one for like 2 years.
Yeah.
As far as question we've had a couple times is, what do you need to watch out for if you've only got the measurements but not the physical knife?
I refuse to make that sheet.
So if it was a cheaper commission,
Yeah.
so not a full art commission, but just like, hey, could you make a sheath for this? Here's the dimensions. Chris is working on a knife, not quite done yet. You know the finished dimensions. What could he give you, or what could the crafter give you to get you started?
Okay.
If you were to accept that job.
I would ask for the customer to do this, to lay out this, right? So lay it out, trace it, and then give you like dimensions all the way down.
Yep.
Okay? So that you can recreate it as best as possible. Or if they don't want to send you the knife, but maybe they'll send you a piece of paper like this, that could even also be really good. I really hate making a sheet that I don't have a knife for. So
I do a lot of my prep work in Illustrator for any project.
Yeah.
So what I have customers send me a bunch, if they can't send me the thing, is send me a photo of the thing laid next to a ruler on a flat surface taken top down.
Yeah.
Because I can bring that in Illustrator, scale it, good to go. I can work from there.
So you can do that. But then also like a trace with dimensions all the way down. This dimension.
Your thickness of your blade too.
Yep. And then
as Liz was saying. Yeah.
This. And then for how long it's that thick. Because we're going to create a stacked welt because blades taper, right? And so the tip of my blade is thinner than this side of my blade. And so a lot of times I will do like one piece of 8 to 9 ounce for the entire thing around, and then I will stack this to get to whatever thickness I need here.
You don't want the tip of your knife wiggling around in the sheath.
Exactly. Yeah, it just makes it to kind of just like, you'll have like this almost like the air goes out of the sheath when you put this in.
It feels wild. Liz is like, I think you brought in one of your sheaths with a knife in it, and I was like, this feels fake. It feels strange.
And so yes, thickness, and then for how long it's that thick.
Solvent or water-based?
Dye?
Glue.
Oh, glue. I mean, I've been using
your heart.
Yeah, I've been using the Renia just because I work in a room, that I have like a window, but I don't open it.
You've got a dog that hangs around?
Yeah, I have 5 dogs that hang around.
Oh, yeah, you've got a billion pets. Contact
cement. So the Renia Aquilum is really good. And like I had constructed a sheath with, I had some old masters that I had for a while that I had been thinning for a little bit. And I went to make a sheath, and my pieces kept separating as I was attempting to sew. So as I was hand sewing, I punch the top, which will go over with a chisel to get my stitch line all figured out. And then I go through with an awl, one hole at a time. And my back kept popping off, and it made me so mad, because then that breaks your glue line, and then your seam does not look very good when you go to finish it because it's not glued up properly.
And if it bends far enough, it'll break the grain. And that's a whole other thing.
Yeah, it just doesn't look good. So if you're happy with the Aquilum, use the Aquilum. If you like your Masters or Barge or Van Grip or whatever it is that you're using, just make sure you have good glue that's going to hold everything together really well.
Whatever sticks your leather.
Yeah.
The last one is a couple questions all about kind of weird dimensions.
Okay.
So 2-inch wide bolster on this knife. How can you kind of plan for that not to be an awkward problem? Because you don't want a 2-inch wide sheath, particularly if it's a thinner blade. It's just one of the questions there is those dimensions from Mike Seeger, a little ways up. Low fear on yours, small short knife, big heavy handle. You can put a, if this is the blade and this is the handle, if this is the blade and this is the handle, you can put a little strap around that on your sheath with a taller back, and it'll keep it all nice and tidy.
Yeah.
But as far as really wild dimensions, like a huge bolster, what would you do to handle that or design towards it? Do you lean toward or away?
Well, so if you don't have a guard and you just have a really fat bolster here, a lot of...
Sorry, don't say guard. My bad.
Okay. Well, I mean, this thing is...
Yeah.
Like, this is...
That's about 2 inches, yeah.
It's 3 inches.
3 inches? Oh, okay. So,
Yeah, so this is a 3-inch guard that I have here. Are you talking about, like, this way? Like, width-wise, you have a really wide one? I've seen some of those.
It's like a saber guard on a knife.
Yeah, so sometimes it'll just be like this big round plate or like an ovally plate. So my preferred style of belt loop construction is one that does not come straight off the back, that is assembled with the back. I don't think that I have ever, unless I do not have a guard and the handle goes into the sheath, I will almost never attach the belt or like have the belt loop be part of the back of the sheath.
Never integral.
Correct. It is always separate. And that means depending on how thick this is, I will set the belt loop farther down so that it moves, right? So that the belt loop will, so that the belt loop can move out. You can put the knife in. And there's really no way. I mean, you can build up the back of the sheath, but that would be ridiculously thick to allow for that much guard. And so either keep the belt, depending on how long the knife is, you can keep the belt loop housed here. So a lot of times what I like to do is I just make a flat belt loop that I sew in at the top and the bottom, and it never comes up to the handle. So like it never crosses the guard.
So that loop will do your flexing and bending.
Well, no, so the loop is just flat. So then the belt just goes through here and it just holds it like this, and then that is just going to sit against you. So it can either sit, however. But if it is so wide that you think that it will physically cut into you, then you make the loop that comes out, you sew it to the belt loop, but then that allows it to move. So most likely it's still going to scratch the leather on the inside, like on the loop, but it's not going to like ride it, like those ones where it's just attached to the back and it has no room to move. So if your guard is that wide, there's not a lot you can do about like making sure the leather never gets scratched, but you can set it farther down to give yourself an allowance here to allow the belt loop to flex. A
Cool.
knife with a bent tip.
I think
Yeah.
everybody.
So, so I guess there's the other, a recurve knife, which is where the blade comes back like this, and you cannot make a sheath that sews all the way up both sides. So sometimes you might have a recurve. I had one. What you'll do is you will leave this spine section open. So like this is also sharp on top, right? This is blade also.
Really?
Yes. But this is just flat. So what I do is if I have a recurve situation, this part of the sheath stays open. So this gets stitched before assembly. You have an open space here, and then you have a strap that comes around, typically with a button stud, that will close the sheath. So you can put it, because otherwise the knife won't go in the sheath. If you have a recurve that's so far, you can't physically vertically get it into the sheath if it's closed.
Like a cookery sheath. You
Yeah.
know, it drops the tip in, then brings the rest in.
So you start your opening wherever it's not the ricasso. I'm sorry, I don't know what this section is called.
Don't know either.
In any case, whatever this section is called, Kyle, help me out here. Stick a comment. I don't know, you're probably not watching. In any case.
If y'all haven't caught on yet,
So,
Liz views knives and sheets differently than the rest of us.
It's been a long time. Yeah. So this section,
A lot.
leave this open so that you can put the knife in from the side. It clips in, and then you put a strap over with a button stud. You can make that look really cool. I've done a couple of those. They're fun.
I think we're good.
Okay.
So how do you get your inlay situated?
All right. Yeah, it is. Is this just the spine, and then this is the blade? Whatever. All right. So
Yeah, I think it should be just fine.
I think it's just spine. Yeah.
That
All right.
bit.
Thanks, guys. This bit. Let's see here. So I think we're good on all that. The bigger the knife, the heavier I like my leather to be. I line anything that I'm doing like this, even if I don't necessarily put an inlay in it, like if I'm just tooling, it still gets lined. Like I don't want the back of leather is gritty, it can be porous, it can catch and hold things, and so I prefer to get a good lining. Plus it just looks better, And if you're, you know, if you're going to all the trouble to make something for this kind of knife, just line it.
And it gives that airtight feel.
Yeah.
Like flush side will not do that.
So line your sheath. So typically, once again, with the size, a good 8 to 9 ounce for my front layer. Sometimes maybe depending on the exotic that I'm using, I might do like, you can play with it. I typically like around maybe like 12 ounces total. So 8 to 9 ounce, and then a liner of 3 to 4, or maybe 2 to 3 if you're doing a little bit lighter, because you don't want the sheath to flex. You have to put this knife all the way into it. And if you have thin leather, leather breaks down over time. It gets softer with use, you know? And so if your leather is too thin, you're not gonna hold the rigidity over the lifetime to make sure that every time you put that blade into the sheath, you're not getting like a droop on the end where the knife will just cut through. Because if it is sharp enough, it'll just go through. Exactly, yeah. So like if you have a flexible end, like you don't want that. And so making sure that whatever you're getting, somewhere between like 10 and 12 ounces is where I like each of my layers, but maybe even heavier. Like I said, for that that dagger sheath, I was probably about 1/4 of an inch, which is like 16 ounces on both sides. But I also had, I had multiple layers of just pieces everywhere. It was
You'll have to
crazy.
bring that one in Friday if you have it.
I do not
Or
have it. It's
photos
gone.
of it we can upload. If you
so-
move that, there's the pattern.
Yeah.
It's not like a pattern she made a digital version of. This is something that Liz just goes straight into. I mean, this is something that's made for the ones.
I just draw.
The pattern is very specific to that exact knife.
Correct.
Not very translatable.
So for my inlay, like I said, I took the design of the guard here and I mimicked it in my inlay. Like I came in the 3/8 of an inch. Typically I will use my welt thickness is approximate to where I want to put my inlay. If that's what I'm doing, it allows for a stitch line on both sides. I still have 1/8 of an inch here to stitch, and then 1/8 of an inch from the inside to stitch it down. So there'll be a stitch line here, there'll be a stitch line here, here, and then up here. And then I convinced Kevin to do a little finger carving for me. So he's gonna come in and do that at the end of this video, so you guys will be able to see that. So yeah, so.
Sorry, Dean, you're already gone.
Hi, Dean.
No, he left a long time ago. Let's see, you're also talking about how you're wanting to show how to fit up that inlay piece. Because there's a lot of splitting and making that work.
I've already talked for a whole 40 minutes.
Yep.
Look at me go.
So let's hear. We can put the knife up.
All right.
Get that out of your way so you can take your gloves off and work more comfortably. Yeah, it's always the worst, taking off those rubber gloves.
All right, so let's talk about inlay, and then we'll probably be good for the day. So once again, everything out of Bondtex so that you have like a sturdy pattern. Like everything needs to be sturdy. You need to be able to trace it. A good modeling tool or something like this is just an awl with a pokey end that I can trace out. So I've already got my inlay going here. I've talked about this a few times before in the past, but when you're doing an inlay, so let's see here. I guess this is just, so this was my template, right? So I traced my outline. So I've got my outline here on the piece of leather.
Scratched in.
Yep, just scratched in with the awl. I do not typically fully cut out all my pieces until I'm ready to assemble. I like to have my lining glued up, everything ready to go, and then cut out everything at once so I just have the best cut line I can. I cannot emphasize how much easier it is to finish edges when you have that good straight. Make sure your X-Acto knife or your whatever knife it is, if you're brave enough to use a head knife, just nice and sharp. One nice crisp cut is going to make edging so much better. And frankly, if you are showing your sheath to another leather crafter, like maybe like non-leather people won't notice this, but edges are going to be the #1 thing that a leather crafter looks at to judge you on. In any case, so
Looking for fuzz on linings and stuff.
Yeah. So we're going to cut out the inlay. Make sure that you're cutting it. You don't want to overcut in here so that when you are cutting, and I cut everything out here with an X-Acto knife. When you are cutting your pieces, if you're trying to cut this kind of thing, you want to come in from the bottom and you want to clip it there, and you're going to turn around and you're going to clip it there. You never drag into the end of your cut because then you're going to overcut and you don't want an overcut here. So you want to, with the very, very tip, you want to get into that little end and then just work it back and forth. You know, make sure your blade is secured, whatever.
It's scary watching.
But just make sure, and then work it until that end comes free.
Yeah.
And try not to tear it because it's really hard. You can try to get in there with little nips and whatever to get the little fuzzies out of the corner, but just as clean of a cut as you can make.
That's my number one project restart point.
Yeah.
Is when I overcut an inside corner.
Yeah, don't overcut. Start here. You could drag, be like, "Mer," and then be like, all right, I'm gonna stop there, and then you can flip it around, and then you're gonna come in and you're gonna cut like that. Okay, so go into your corners. Don't overcut. So inlays. For your inlay, you're going to take the piece that you cut out, and depending on how thick the piece of leather is that you are putting into it, this is a piece of snake, so he's real thin. It's like 1 ounce leather. And so I did not have to take off much from this, but you're going to reduce the thickness of the part that you cut out, the amount of thick that your inlay is. So if you've got a piece of elephant that is rather heavy, you're going to take this down by whatever thickness this is, because the goal of an inlay is for everything to be flush. You still want to be able to move your finger across the top of the sheath. You don't want to go down into a divot, especially if you're using heavyweight leather. Sometimes for the front, if I'm not doing any tooling, I might cut, the front out of 3 to 4 ounce. That way I just have a little tiny one. But sometimes it's fun to do it thicker, and then you can, you have almost like a cushion that's coming out whenever you do your inlay, which is really nice. And then
it's described as a nice quilted look almost.
Yeah, that's what you want. And then with your inlay piece, I took this to our fancy splitter, but if you don't have a fancy splitter, they are fancy. You're going to take sandpaper and you're going to sand the top off. So this is the piece that I cut out here, but we've split the grain off. That way it is, it's going to glue better. There's no point in having any grain on there. So I just took it down 2 ounces, split the grain off, made everything happy. And then what you're going to do is then you're going to reduce the overall size of the inlay piece, once again, to about the thickness of your inlay, so that when you put your inlay over it and you put this, everything lines up and it all fits in and you get that nice pillow. And so I took this to the sander, and because my piece is so thin, I really did not have to take off all that much. And so when you look at that, there's just a little bit of light coming through around the edge, once again, if it was a piece of elephant, this piece would need to be significantly smaller. And then for me, I would, instead of trying to cut this end, that's all fun and like that, I would cut this end to reduce this, and then kind of take these sides down to kind of just scoot this, because this is going to be terrible to try to recut perfectly. But if you just cut this end until it scooches down. But anyways.
If you're using heavier leather.
Exactly. If you're using heavier leather and you need to allow more space to get it to sit nicely.
And you can see really well at this point how Liz was talking about in the beginning, when you're tracing your knife, the difference between using a pencil and a Sharpie will sink you at this point.
Yeah.
It will kill your project.
Yeah, you want to make sure that you are cutting exactly where you want to be. Because this gap matters.
Yeah.
Having the exact stitch space, because you need to get 2 stitch lines in here that are approximately 1/8 inch from the edge. And so if you are not being careful to make sure that these lines stay nice and crisp and smooth, your stitching is not going to look good later on, and you're going to have weird.
And getting your inlay flush, you're dealing with tenths of millimeters.
Yeah. So to do the inlay part, I just split down. This is just a piece of split. It's super duper thin. This is going to be housed in the middle, so this will be one of the layers of my sheath.
Do you want to point Kevin his piece to start finger carving on while you're talking?
Oh yeah, we could do that in his 10:45. Kevin has come to carve.
You can not step on the dog.
All right. Are you ready?
Of course.
Okay, I'm only going to have you do one of these pieces, and then I'm going to have to make you do the other one when I'm more ready to assemble, because I don't know. So with the frog, guys, here's the thing about frogs, is that, and then there's the back, is that until you have the sheath kind of assembled and you know how, what your final thickness is, it's hard to gauge exactly how much the length of your frog needs to be to overlap depending on your construction. And so my frog is lacing up the front. So this is the front of my frog. There will be a line here that I'm buck stitching with some really awesome turquoise lace. So it needs to come around and fit perfectly. And then this is where my button stud will be. And I might need to move that around a little bit. There might be a little bit left of the sheath because it really needs to clip in and then not pull back out like easily. And so anyway, so this I might have to play with a little bit. But because I'm lacing it up, I will not cut my frog until my sheath is assembled and I know how thick it is and how much leather I need to allow for the thing.
So are you having a stitch line go all the way down here?
Correct. There'll be a stitch line. Oh, here, let me actually mark it for you. I brought in calipers to do just that.
So this is a big part of it too, especially when you're working with multiple crafters. This single project has the knife maker, Liz, and Kevin all working on this one project together. So this sort of communication and getting Kevin this extra information is all very important stuff.
A lot of people don't realize that a lot of people do work with multiple crafters.
Yep.
Here,
They just do, because some people can't carve leather, but they can sew it and cut it and construct it. And some people have people that carve, some people have that.
The same with knife makers. Some knife makers don't engrave.
With me and Anderson over at R&D, he's a lot better at sewing than I am, so every project's a collaboration. Y'all have seen me struggle with the sewing machines enough times.
So, Liz, how far down can I go here? Hi, Loons. How's little Lunar? I need a treat, don't you?
Needs it desperately.
I can see there that you have a treat on your mind. I have one. Gave me a treat. I dropped it.
She's spoiled.
This here scratch all this? I love this.
Okay, so I can cut in between those lines, kind of, sort of.
Correct. And then you're going to do something here.
And where?
Below this line. In here somewhere. Hey, Luna, come on. Please carve
Oh,
it.
that's a big spot.
I know. I showed it to you yesterday. Yeah. Can you hold on for just a second?
Of course I can.
Oh, were you?
Yeah, he had this other camera.
Oh, sorry. All right.
Is that the one by me, Tony?
It's good.
No.
All right. So Kevin's just going to do some fun carving for me. Stop it. And then, so for your inlet, stop.
Luna, my dear.
Come
Come over here.
Go.
Come see me.
For your inlay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue my inlay piece now that it's the right thickness, now that it is, the right size for the inset so that everything's going to go in just fine and everything's going to be happy there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to glue it down really well to my split piece, which again is very, very thin. I just need something that I can secure, mold around, and then sew through, because once again, this is really, really thin. I'll be sewing through this front panel and this, but it's a little bit awkward just to have this as the backside. So I'm going to go all the way through to this piece of split, but I don't want a stitch line on the inside of my sheath.
Do I go up here?
Yeah, but just a little tiny bit. You see where this is going to be? So you have this section right here. And then we're going to work that with a modeler. Do you wet form the frog? I probably will just a little bit as I fold it around to prevent the outside from cracking as I mold it. It'll depend. This is my frog panels, and so together they're approximately, I'm at like 9 ounces is what I asked Jared to do. I have 4.5 and 4.5. Because once again, we're going to tool, but we're tooling on both sides because one side, the belt loop folds around and we'll stitch here. So I need to tool the back side of that. And then this folds around here. So I need to tool the front side here. And so we'll do that later. Oh, that's pretty, Kevin.
Well, it's simple.
I knew I could count on you.
And tell me where you want this to be all down here?
I see these 2 marks.
Yes.
So that's where my frog sits. So just something, it could just be in here because I do have to put my stamp on it down there. So just somewhere in here.
You are very trusting, I will say that.
Luna.
You're such a good girl.
Well, yeah. I've seen you do this so many times.
How's that?
That's, I mean, I'd like more, but
Leave it there. Perfect.
Go. All right, I'm gonna glue this down.
What is? Yep.
Haven't moved. Sorry, Tony.
Striker, you're talking about wanting to find someone to collaborate with on some tooling stuff. Our Springfield Leather Discord is a great place to talk to people about that. It's a good spot for folks to chat to each other and say, hey, I've got a project. Who wants to work on it with me? I'll ship you parts, you know?
Yeah.
So hit that up.
There's also a Crafters Guild
Yep.
that's on Discord and also on Twitch.
I'm on both the Springfield Leather and that Crafters Guild Discord pretty often just to kind of chit-chat with people and get ideas. It's always fun to see what folks are working on and see just what other people do, because the way I do things is not the way Liz does things, is not the way you do things. So it's always important to get as much input as you can and then do what you please.
That's too much glue.
Yep. Yeah, Rennie, that Aquilum's deceptive. It's very thin coats.
That's a common problem with a lot of people with a lot of things.
Yeah.
The knife has a serial number on it or something. I identify the name. Michael, not unless they've requested it. I mean, I put my own stamp. If I'm making a sheath, I put my stamp on the sheath. That would be a question between you and the client, whoever that is.
Yeah. Something like a knife like this, I wouldn't be worried too much about someone trying to, bait and switch this knife, because it'd be pretty hard to get it to look anything like that.
Well, actually, there's
It's all very handmade.
but because it's one of Kyle's courses. It is actually, there's probably several duplicates of it out there in the world.
But with his Master Smith stamp.
But not with his Master Smith stamp. No, that is true. When I do the inlay, I want to make sure that I have like glue on all the edges.
His vertical faces, yeah.
Because I want my inlay to stick to them well.
And bevel your inlay backer.
Oh yeah, I didn't talk about
round
that.
those corners off.
Yeah, so everything here is beveled. I'm not so worried about like the here, like on the very bottom, but the top side is beveled. Everything is beveled and nice, so that you don't have any. It just makes it look, once again, that kind of cushiony, rounded situation. It doesn't have to be a heavy bevel, but just make sure that your little
It's one of those design
filler
things that comes down to the project.
Yeah, make sure that your filler is complete and it's finished.
I've had some, like when I was working with some lizard, some of the ring lizard, the really thin stuff, where to reduce the size of my inlay backer, all I did was number 5 bevel it. And that took the size down enough to make clearance for that lizard.
Yeah, if I was working with thinner leather than I am here, I could have probably done a lot less, but because it's thicker, it needed to
Needs to
come up
move
more.
further.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I was doing a journal cover, something like 7 ounce. Yeah, on your inlay, like your exotic inlay, don't worry about gluing too much of it down. You'll be happier rather than not enough.
Yeah. I just try, like what I'll probably do is I don't really want it in my seam because it won't finish well. And so I'll go through and I'll kind of like lightly cut it once I get it around here so that it's just a nice fit. All right. And
The fun part to hold your breath and be careful because you want your scale pattern or your grain pattern to be exactly how you want it. That's kind of the big difference between when you're doing a functional design and art design is the art design will still be functional, but also has to be very, very precise.
And have a good modeling tool.
If that's your style.
I bought a really nice Barry King modeling, like, I don't know, it's like a wand. It's got 2 different shape tips. It's got like a cone shaped tip and then a rounded tip. This is just our modeling spoon, but make sure if you just got it right out of the package, that if there are any lines or anything that maybe isn't completely flat, take it to, you know, your sander.
Casting seams.
Yeah, polisher,
Yeah.
and polish it. And then, especially with Snake has scales, so go with the scales. You don't want to like model up.
Like scale on a bluegill.
Yeah, so
Do I have another?
yes, you have this piece. So this top here, but once again, there will be a stitch line. Look how
That's
cute that
beautiful.
is. Kevin,
What?
I love it.
Okay, I see what I've been trying to learn finger carving, so I'm pretty excited to be
what do I
learning
have
about
here?
sheath making and finger carving today.
You have
Oh,
this
just a
kind of,
little,
yeah.
an oval right there.
sure. Or if you want, you could mirror 2 things, but I don't know if you want to do that. So, and then we're just gonna work the snake around.
And I think doing projects like this, even if you're not really getting into like artistic leatherwork, but doing something that's super high precision, like Liz does her sheaths, is good practice for any leatherworker. I know it always, anytime I do a precision leather job, it teaches me a lot of patience and a lot of tricks.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of kind of measuring and fitting tricks that will help me do other projects much faster. Because you can't get it wrong on a precision project. Not an option.
You can,
Well, yeah.
but you might not have a lot of that kind of work.
It might be your last one. I think, one of those things I can never spend enough time practicing is just antiquing. Because it can really change the look of your tooling, and it's the last thing you do on a tooling project, so if it goes wrong, you get to start over.
Got just like that nice crisp line. And then I will take this once Kevin is done and we're off here. I'm going to airbrush it because the handle is that kind of like dark black, blue, but there's a little bit of brown still left in it.
Almost like a peach color.
Yeah. So I'm going to airbrush and do a burst around. So all the around will be black of everything. And then I'm going to leave the middle natural. So hopefully that goes well. I do also like to label all my parts. Just, I mean, like, it becomes a little obvious. Sometimes it's not on your lining pieces where you're like, all right, I cut this one specifically for the front and this one for the back. Sometimes just labeling them is nice. So that's the inlay, and then it will get stitched. So have my stitch line running here. It'll get an 1/8 of an inch stitch all the way around. I'm going to use black thread. I was going to try to use a blue, but I couldn't find anything that matched close enough. So we're going to do black. Yeah.
And the labeling's good too. I over label as well because sometimes I won't look at a project for 4 or 5 days.
Mm-hmm.
And then I come back and, 4 or 5 days ago I knew what this part was and it seemed really obvious to me.
Yeah.
But not anymore.
Yeah. Pretty happy with that inlay.
Yeah. And that carving.
We're really good. I know.
Gosh.
Kevin's the goat.
Calling Kevin a goat. Come on. He's not that cranky.
Yeah. So
So any tips on modeling those weird shapes? So this, and this, I feel like would give me fits.
like you just need the right size modeler. So I like with the rest of it, I use the big side of the spoon because it was easy. But with the other side, I just use this little one. And you want to like just work it and just kind of like.
So you're kind of massaging it into place rather than just giving it a quick swipe.
Correct. Yeah. You can just keep working it. Leather will kind of stretch. It gives a little bit. I mean, even snake, you just kind of keep working it. As long as you got glue where your glue should be, you just kind of keep working it in and you can get those spots. So now I will take and I will just trim this very lightly all the way around. That way it's just not I want it in my first stitch line, but honestly, it's not going to go anywhere. So as long as it's between the two sections, but I don't want it in my edge because it's so shiny, it's going to affect the way the leather glues together. And so I do not want any of the snake at like 1/8 of an inch or closer to my edge. It needs to be inside so that I get a nice glue on my front piece to this piece.
And it's one of those things too, if it is at your edge, it doesn't matter how perfectly you cut it, how perfectly you burnish it, it will never burnish right.
Yeah.
Your pieces will always have a visible separation.
Yeah, which is why I use veg for here, because this will burnish in very nicely. It's a very thin piece of split.
Here.
Yep.
And it's all Herman oak, so that way when it burnishes, it'll all burnish the same color.
Yeah. Yeah, you can use the same technique with rattlesnake.
Yep. If you're working with different inlays, something a little firmer than this thin snake, you might not be able to do this, wavy accent at the top. It may not mold to that. So kind of get familiar with your exotics before you start gluing them as well.
Hey, Tony, did you see that question about the forum group at Stanley? What forum group were you talking about? There's several groups on Facebook, and then we have there's a couple Discord groups. We have one
So there's others and one Chevy works with as well.
Somebody on Twitch have the leather crafters Discord.
I don't know if that one's an invite or what. I'm not sure.
So Striker, you asked about that much overhang on the inlay. No, I mean, like I just said, I'm going to trim it, but I like to start with more than I need, because sometimes if you try to cut the inlay exact to size, I find that it always gets undersized, because this is hard to account for, like the little lip here that I'm pushing it in. And so I just oversize it, and then because I only put the glue where the inlay goes pretty much, I didn't have a lot of excess glue around it, and so I'm able to pull that back up, and then I'll trim it.
Always easy to remove material. It is very difficult to add material back.
Yeah.
Not impossible, but
Sometimes it can be.
yeah, depends on the material and how you removed it.
So that just kind of will pop up. And I probably would have done that a little bit quicker if I wasn't talking to you guys. But
While the glue is still wet.
yeah.
But on that side, you've got a little bit of room.
Yeah. I got space.
Yeah.
Got like some sharp scissors you could go in.
A good sharp edge beveler too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's really nice when I'm just trimming off a glue line. You can just run your edge beveler on there and it won't peel up your glue, but it will just slice off what's standing.
Nice. Yeah, so I don't know if we already, each piece, so I like to have a pattern for each section. So okay, so this is another thing that as Kevin is finishing up here, I'll talk about. So I have my front piece with my inlay. So this is a pattern all on its own. This is for my welt. So this I will cut, and this is specifically like, this is my welt. I trace the whole thing out, and then I make sure that this is where I want it to be. I'll take off the outside, and then I will trace this, because it's a lot easier to trace this than it is to try to trace these little flappy wings. So make sure that it's all together, and then trace around that, and then that gives me my welt, right? So this is my welt outline, and then I have my welt stacks. So this will go on the front and the back to increase the thickness here, but I want to do it on both sides, so I'm using two of them instead of just putting one on one side and then it be kind of like uneven on the edge, to increase the thickness where the spine is, so that the knife goes in well, but I don't want to increase the thickness all the way around here because the rest of it's thin. So
it's very important to have it on the front and the back, not just double layered the front, because you want to have an even wedge, not a one-sided ring.
Exactly. Wedge is a good word. And then I have a final finish dimension pattern that I am not cutting up, and this does not account for this top trim line. So when I have everything assembled, this is just really handy to have so that as I'm working, I can just make sure that my pieces are not stretching. They are still
You can
in
see
the
the
right
whole
line.
image there.
Yep, I can see we've got my trim line here. And so this is my finished dimension without the trim, so that I know where to trim.
That's your goal.
Whenever, So this one stays as is. This is what all my pieces need to be when I'm ready to glue up and assemble. So.
Am I done?
Thanks, Kevin.
You're very well.
That's really pretty.
It's awesome.
Well, I hope it works.
Did you sign it?
No. It's your sheath.
Put a little something there.
Well, something.
Look how pretty.
Oh.
And you said this is gonna be Kyle's personal knife,
Yes.
so definitely sign it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gotta have the Kevin signature on your personal knife.
Yeah. I didn't do it.
Yeah, so you can see all this, how Liz makes sheets versus how I make sheets where, hey, that holds my knife in. That's my goal.
Yeah, that's how I make sheaths too.
Perfect.
My knife won't cut my hand in my bag.
No, I won't dye. I will dye the edge as I'm doing the edge. So I'm actually going to try to use the Rinia black dye. See how that goes. I'm going to airbrush it. And then I will use it for my edging. And so I will just dye the edge. I will dye the top edge. There have been times.
Curious to see how that airbrushes.
Yeah, so there have been times where I will dye the inside of the welt. So if everything is black, I will dye like the first couple inches if you can see into it. Let me see if I can find that dagger. Here it is.
Love how Kevin signed this.
Just a tiny little
The
H.
tiniest H in the world. Beautiful. Sorry, I'm doing like some studying now.
All right. So you can see this here a little bit. I did dye like the inside of the welt just to finish it out. And I dyed it black to go through the edging. But that was the dagger sheath that I've been talking about. And the belt loop style that I talked about. So just flat.
Mm-hmm.
I like to do those. I usually put my exotic inlay in them. Have a little fun with that. This one was just a million pieces.
Yeah, Hatter. So what Kevin did here is called finger carving. If you're getting into tooling at all or just want to play with a swivel knife, I highly recommend looking into it. It's really good to learn the kind of form and flow of
Really
different styles of tooling, and it's just a blast and a great way to spruce up a project.
Yeah.
I mean, as a leather crafter, if you sell your goods, 10 minutes of finger carving is $50 worth of product.
When you sew, does your sewing catch any of this? Yeah, so I will do 2 stitch lines. One will be specifically for the inlay. Number one, just because it looks nice to have a stitch line around your inlay. Honestly, it's not super necessary, depending, like it's close enough to the edge. You could, like I would definitely want to stitch like the top and the bottom to keep everything down. It would be close enough here, but I'm going to do a stitch line all the way around. And then you have your overall stitch line. It's just a nice, it just looks better. It's just better. And then you don't have to worry about it pulling up.
All right. That's the hour.
Okay. Thanks, Tony.
We're getting the light, flashing at us. Crook's coming in from the side to pull us out. Yeah, thanks everybody for
Alrighty.
hanging out.
We will see you on Friday, or those of you that live shop, we'll see you tomorrow at 2 Central for live shopping. Have a great rest of your day.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.